Welcome back, everybody. As simple as this sounds, recording great guitar tone starts with having great guitar tone to record. Now, I'm definitely not going to sit here and tell you exactly how to dial in all your settings on your amp and pedals to get a good tone. That's 100% subjective and totally up to you and your creativity. In this video, I'd like to just briefly go over some of the common practices and some of the common pitfalls to watch out for. So let's not waste any time and let's jump right in. Let's start with the guitar. Obviously, there's so many different types of guitars and many different types of tones that you might be after. So choosing the right guitar will be a huge step towards getting the tone that you're after. Now, there's really too much information here to really dive in, but I've put some of the basics down on this slide, and if you're looking for a specific tone, hopefully this will help point you in the right direction. Once you've got the right tone and also the right guitarist for the job, the first thing that kills any guitar recording before it even starts is hum and noise from your amp. Now, some noise is totally acceptable and even expected, but if it feels excessive to you in the room, it's definitely going to feel excessive in the recording. So, if you turn on your amp and you're blasted with a tone like this is called a ground loop or a 60-cycle hum. And a ground loop happens when a device sees more than one path to ground. If you are experiencing this, the easiest and cleanest way to fix a ground loop is to make sure all your gear is plugged into a single AC circuit. So make sure you just have a couple extension cords around so you can fix this quickly when it arises. Now, if that's not possible, anything you can do to break the loop will also solve the problem. So if any of your gear has a ground lift or a ground switch, that's going to completely remove the ground from the path. But just make sure you never use those little 3 to 2 prong AC adapters. Those don't remove the ground safely and can cause you serious harm. If nothing else works, there are products out there that are designed to kill ground loops safely, so check those out if you can't fix it any other way. But to be honest, I've never had to purchase and try one out. It's always been possible to clean up the ground loop in one of the ways I mentioned. Now, if your amp is noisy but it's not a ground loop, it's most likely induced noises being picked up from other sources nearby. Any AC cables or transformers are the likely culprits, so try moving the amp and any suspicious items around the room until the noise stops. Also, move your guitarist around in relationship to the amp, as slight turns can cause noise to flare up or down, especially when using single coil pickups. I also always recommend using a power conditioner whenever possible. Not only are they good for the longevity of your devices, but they also help cut down unwanted noise as well. Once your amp noise is under control, let's focus on amp placement. If your speaker cab is sitting directly on a carpeted floor, a lot of the brightness is going to be soaked up before it reaches the mic, and you'll be left with a dull and muddy sound. So I usually recommend elevating your amp up on a stand so you can maintain that high-end excitement, and then you can control the low-end warmth using the EQ on the amp. So this brings us to dialing in the settings on your amp and any pedals. Again, I don't plan on trying to tell you how to do this. Every situation is completely different. However, I do have a few quick tips. Quick tip number 1, as I mentioned, if you're recording in a small room, like a bedroom for instance, your guitar recordings will probably have the tendency to sound a little muddy due to low-end buildup in the corners of your room. So, you'll almost always want to back the bass down a little bit on your amp, and if you still have a problem or that's not possible, try to soak up some of that extra low end with bass traps if you can, or even using couch cushions or comforters works in a pinch. But no matter where you are, in general, just back that bass knob down just a little more than you might while playing live, and you'll really end up with cleaner recordings. My second tip is always consider the context of the guitar within the mix. This can give you a lot of insight on how to set up the tone on your amp. Keep in mind that lead guitar parts will probably be more effective, brighter, so they stick out in the mix, whereas an accompanying line will probably want to be slightly darker in tone. That way it sits where it needs to. My third quick tip is figure out where the guitarist is playing. If they're playing a lot of low notes, you might want to dial the amp in a little brighter, whereas if the guitarist is playing a lot of high-end deedle-dee-deedle-dees, then you may want to beef up that tone a little more to compensate so it doesn't sound shrill and thin up in that high register. Quick tip number 4, if you're going for a dirty or distorted tone, use less distortion than you might normally. I find that overdrive and distortion type effects just seem a lot more distorted and overdriven in the recording than they do in the room or in a live setting. So just bear this in mind and maybe dial back just a hair or two after you get your perfect tone in the room. Quick tip number 5, don't fall for the idea that a bigger speaker equals a bigger sound. It's not the case at all. In fact, I find that a single 12-inch speaker cab seems to be the most versatile, but a 15 or an 18 will give you more low end, and an 8 or a 10 is going to give you more bite. But it's really the way you mic the speaker more than the size of the speaker, but just keep in mind that there are certain characteristics that do come along with the size and type of speaker being used. But it's always possible that you'll find an 8-inch or even smaller speaker that's well mic'd might be the secret sauce for the tone that you're after. In terms of using a single speaker cab or a multi-speaker cab, personally, I think it's easier to get the tone you're after on a single speaker cab, but cabs with multiple speakers are okay as well. Just remember that the sound is coming from multiple sources, so it makes the phase relationships a little harder to measure, and you'll usually get a blurrier image of the guitar tone, which isn't always a bad thing, but it can be limiting. So if you're stuck using a multi-speaker cab, you're either going to want to be very close to one of the speakers in the cab, or back the mic up 3 to 6 feet and get a more roomy tone of all the speakers combined. And finally, tone tip number 6, keep the reverb off for the recording process and add it while mixing. That reverb sounds really good in the room, but it seems to always sound really narrow in the recording. 99.9 repeating % of the time, you'll be able to get a more lush reverb sound while mixing, and you'll have a ton more control. Using delays is okay, but I usually opt to do those in post as well. If you do decide to bake in those delay tones now, just take the time to make sure the delay times are perfect, because you'll kick yourself later when you realize they're not spot on. And that's it for setting up. Hopefully that gives you a good idea and some tips to get the guitar tone sounding great for recording in your room. In the next video, we're going to talk about a vital step that a lot of people ignore and skip completely, and that's to record a dry version of your guitar as well simultaneously, so you can run it through any manner of amp sims in post, or back out into pedals and amps and any chains you want to really round out your guitar tone and make creative, unique tones that make your guitar recordings stand out. So stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.